Cheers, guys. Epix 911. Welcome to what would normally be the Friday gaming night edition of VR News. As you can see, unfortunately, my buddy Exidy is not in frame. He's not here. And I'd normally just let this go and get on with the news, but it kind of ties into the channel, so I feel I owe it at least a brief explanation. And here it is. Those of you who may have left me comments with specific questions that I usually do a very good job of answering, I haven't been able to because I haven't had a lot of free time because my real world job has another issue. And there's not a lot. There's usually a couple of these that crop up over the course of a year. This one involving data corruption to a database program we use to do daily sales and purchasing. So it's huge. So it's fixing that in a manual brute force way while people are able to still use it in a real-time environment to make purchases and sales. So I'm going to give myself about an hour to try to wrap up some gaming videos after this, and then it's back to what I've been doing the last 3 evenings, which is fixing things. So there you have it. All right. Let's get back to the fun stuff and the reason most of us are here, virtual reality, specifically gaming. This game called The Mage's Tale was announced by inXile Studios. Now, inXile, I mentioned these guys before when I talked about Kickstarters and my rules for backing Kickstarter projects, that especially with the technical ones, I look for somebody who has a proven track record delivering that type of product. And for Wasteland 2, which was the sequel to a highly acclaimed RPG game, which has given rise to Fallout, for example, from Bethesda, let's just say it's got a little bit of clout behind it. It's based itself on the Bards Tale universe. So the Mage's Tale is going to take place, but completely be in virtual reality. And I like what Brian had to say. He says, when I was a kid, our dungeons consisted of playing Dungeons & Dragons on graph paper. From there, I graduated to playing classic computer games in black and white, like Wizardry, which was the idea behind the full-color Bards Tale. And that's the aforementioned Bards Tale I was talking about. The window for players kept getting bigger, the graphics more advanced, and now with Mage's Tale, we are in the dungeon. And that's the telling statement right there. I was hyped about Siren. Did Siren live up to it ultimately? I'm not going to spoil the whole thing. The video will tell more, but no, it did not. It was horribly disappointing. This I have more faith in, especially with Brian at the helm. So that is one I'm going to be keeping a close eye on. Just a quick aside, talking about Dungeons & Dragons, the Bard's Tale was so much like D&D on computer at the time. Most people played it, or a lot of people did, with buddies all around the computer, one person navigating, each person playing their own character in combat. Extremely fun, extremely nerdy. Absolutely. Next game from the developers Phaser Lock. This game is called Twisted Arrow. Their first game was a game called Final Approach, which was about trying to land on a small airstrip. Twisted Arrow looks to be the TV show Arrow meets The Unspoken, which is the spellcasting VR game. And looks like it'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully, it's a good game. It's currently slated for March 16th, so middle of next month. And it's going to be on both Rift via touch controls, and of course Vive via its controller at about $24.99 with a 25% launch promotion discount. And I should also mention that the Mage's Tale, the first one I talked about, is actually targeting Oculus as well, but just Oculus, no Vive. All right. This came out, news on this, late yesterday evening, that Zenimax had filed an injunction against Oculus over the use of stolen tech. And the reason for this is they're feeling that the 500 million judgment wasn't enough. They feel that Oculus should cease and desist from selling anything that has anything to do with the copyrighted code until they see some cash or come to an agreement. That's what this is all about in quick summary. Zenimax has made that announcement today. And what they said about it was this: Oculus is permanently enjoined on a worldwide basis from using, marketing, selling, distributing, modifying, servicing, copying, or offering for sale any products in whole or part that utilize any of the copyrighted materials. And you'll remember the jury found in favor of Zenimax for copyright violation. So what Zenimax is saying is, we want to have an injunction that includes but isn't limited to the following: system software for Oculus PC, including the SDK. That's huge. That would mean developers couldn't use the current version of the software to create their games. Oculus integration with Epic Unreal Engine. That puts at risk a lot of Unreal Rift games that are out there. And then finally, Oculus, including the mobile SDK. And finally, Oculus integration with the Unity Technologies Unity game engine, which again clobbers it. So first from the right, now from the left. So next step is a response probably from Facebook/Oculus. There's a chance the judge might honor this request, and there is, of course, a chance they won't. So we're going to have to just sit tight and wait to see what the judge says about this, whether the injunction is going to go forward or not. So as soon as we know, I will report that back to you guys. Next news story concerns the application Bigscreen. We've mentioned these guys a few times. We mentioned them back in the beginning of, the whole kind of launch hysteria, when they and Envelop, which is a company that's now defunct, they went out of business a few months ago, when they were able to take the desktop environment, your operating system, into VR for you to manipulate in VR. The idea being that in virtual reality, you could plaster almost unlimited monitor screens wherever you wanted. Literally, all around you, and you could spin in your chair if you wanted to. So that was the idea. Now, Envelop did some decent funding, then went out of business. Bigscreen is approaching it a little different in the sense that they are also social. You can join somebody and collaborate, which is right off the get-go a lot more powerful than the capabilities of Envelop, for example. So they definitely have a unique way of delivering the technology. What could you use that for? The obvious stuff is gameplay together, stuff on the screen, collaborating in that sense. But who knows? There may be other uses. But what they point out specifically in raising this $3 million is that they left a lot on the table. In fact, the CEO mentioned we had 17 million offers on the table, so $17 million. We decided to raise much less because we are disciplined in our approach and plan to be here for the long run. And that was in response to a question: what separates them from Envelop? On the surface, they're similar. We talked about the social aspect. They have the ability to bring other people in. And that was the answer to that question. So we'll see what they're able to do. I haven't gone back since I told that story about Bigscreen. Any of you? Is it something you guys use? What are your thoughts on it? Next story, Sony showing more believable virtual reality characters in PlayStation VR. And they have a game developers conference, which we're going to talk about in a minute or two, which is coming up next week. And they're going to be presenting these new characters. The demo that they're going to show is going to focus on simple 3D procedural spatial behaviors for VR characters. And that roughly translates to virtual characters that understand the spaces that they're inhabiting. So they're going to react to the environment, possibly you if you're in frame, etc. So when you and them share space, hopefully they play off of that. And that's kind of going to bring you away from that uncanny valley where it just looks odd and eerie, and hopefully make it more immersive and more believable that you are dealing with an actual person, albeit in VR. And there's a long way to go to get to that point. This is just another step in that direction. So when they show that demo, hopefully it'll be available. and I will share that here. Next story, Samsung. Their collaboration with Six Flags. We've talked about that in the past. Collaborating once again, this time for a ride called New Revolution Galactic Attack. Now, this thing looks super frantic. It's a coaster ride that uses one of those anchor hung coaster configs, right? Where you've got your coaster track and then you've got where you put the people hanging anchor-wise below. Instead of the conventional, you're on top of the rail. So that adds a lot to it. It's Samsung's Gear VR. That's your, primary. So you're going to have your head tracking, obviously not body because it's already rail-based by being on a roller coaster. Feedback to it, pretty good. Now, no telling if those were independent third-party, just people who happen to try the ride, because you'll see a link to that video below, or if they were in on the marketing. They don't really mention that at any point, but it looks pretty good, and it's an innovative way to make an old coaster ride not feel so stale, right? Especially if you've ridden it a dozen times before. And the last story, guys, the Game Developers Conference. That's going to start next week. The venue is in San Francisco, starts on February 27th, and runs up to and includes March 3rd. So it's going to be quite a few days, and it should be interesting because I've said before, hopefully we'll get some game announcements. I don't expect a company like Sony to. In fact, the author in the article I was just talking about mentioned that as well. They're likely to wait to E3 to do those announcements, but I'm fairly confident we're going to hear from some people on virtual reality. When it comes up, we will talk about it here on the channel. All right, guys, that is it for Friday Night Gaming. I got to play something, at least for an hour, just to keep the spirit alive. Hopefully you guys are doing the same. Have a kick-ass weekend. Cheers.